So I also want to speak to the fact that I know you guys are in this middle ground of trying to figure out, hey, what does it look like to go back into the physical space? You've been in the digital space, so you've had to figure out the digital space over this last year. And so you're kind of in the middle ground. I just think the things that we're going to talk about here are high level enough, the 30,000 foot view on this, that it applies in both categories. This applies more to the thinking behind why you're doing what you're doing, more so than the tactical of what you're doing. I'll also say this just kind of before we get into it, like our bottom lines may not be the same. Your mission, your specific vision for your church may be different than ours. But I think that this process that we're going to kind of talk through will inspire everyone to dig deeper and think more intentionally about how you put your Sunday services together, whether they are digital or they are in the physical space. So I just think the experiences that we create, and we are creating experiences for people. When we put church on, that's what we were doing. We were creating an experience for people. And we implement it. They're critical to the success of our church. We know that. They are vital for furthering our mission and vision. And that's why every leader really needs to be clear. That's why we all need to be clear about what a program is designed to do. I'm going to jump into sharing my screen here for a second, getting into slide world. When we kind of started to say, hey, we want to dissect our process, like if we were to kind of pause the treadmill of Sunday is always coming, and we were to say, hey, what are we trying to do on Sundays when we gather people together? We started with, well, okay, what's one of our biggest oppositions or one of our biggest challenges? We started with a challenge, and this is the one that we, sorry, let me do this. This is the one that we landed on. This is our weekend challenge that we pay attention to. I would encourage you guys to say, hey, what's what's the biggest challenge that you feel like is going to be in opposition to what you guys are trying to create? For us, we think the gravitational pull of the local church will always be towards insiders. And we use sometimes we use that language, insiders versus outsiders. I don't really love that, but it's really basically people who believe and are following in the way and are like-minded versus people who may not follow the way and be believers and like-minded in what we do in our faith. But this is not just unique to church, right? This is human nature. Anytime you get a group of people together and they find something in common, the natural tendency is to huddle up. That's what you do. You put your arms around your shoulders, you face each other, and you put your backs to the world. Like, hey, we've got a tribe. This is our thing. But that is natural. That just becomes naturally exclusive. That's part of the things that make you feel like you belong. But we know the gravitational pull of our church will always be towards insiders because we found our group and we like being together. So that's one of the things that we always put on our radar. Hey, that's one of our challenges. We always want to keep in our mind when we're programming and we're thinking about our Sunday morning services. We also took a step back and say, hey, what is our win? What are we trying to do on a Sunday? When we walk away and Monday happens, how will we know if we're on the mark? How will we know that we're doing what we set out to do? So we said, hey, what is a one sentence win for our Sunday morning environments? And ours is the win on a Sunday is when people's thinking and their behavior shifts in a divine direction, which feels very broad. And you could be like, what in the world does that even mean? I think for us, what we like about that, it is when these folks that show up on a Sunday, and when I say show up, that can mean obviously in person or online, when they show up and they've listened to what we are offering on Tuesday, when they're in the workplace and they find themselves in a situation that gets really challenging, does anything that happened on Sunday, did any of the content that we presented to them show up that is helpful when their finances are in a pinch, when their relationships are being challenged, when work gets really hard, when the world seems to be crashing and burning around them? Did their thoughts turn to God? Are we presenting anything that would help them turn to God in those moments? So that's our win. um, is when people's thinking and or behavior shifts in a divine direction. And then who's our target? Who do we want to be on the other end of what we create, the environment we create on a Sunday? And we say our theological target is skeptic to saint. We want anybody and everybody to show up and be able to get something out of our service. We want the person who, I hate being here, but this person promised me lunch afterwards, so I was willing to come. Great, love it. So glad that you're here. All the way to the person, hey, this is the 187th year that they've been coming to Sunday morning services and sitting in the same spot every Sunday. That's awesome. Love it. Glad you're here. How do we reach everyone? How can we reach everyone? And we think to move that broad of an audience requires us to really find some common ground between everybody. And some of this may feel very remedial, but it's all building somewhere. We think, to move that large of an audience somewhere requires to find common ground between all of those people. Um, the common ground we think is not really theology, probably not a belief system, maybe even facts and figures or style of church. These days to find common ground, I don't know if you all are experiencing this, but I mean, it was hard to find common ground in that large of a gathering anyway. I feel like these days you get two people in a conversation and it's incredibly hard to find common ground. At least that's the way it is around here. So how in the world do we do that? How do we find common ground between all of these people? And we think Jesus gives us a clue in the scriptures. In Luke 15, you know the story about the lost, the parable of the lost sheep. So the tax collectors, right, and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. You all know the story. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and say, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." What we kind of took away from that is in the very beginning when he says the Pharisees were kind of pinning him against, hey, you've got this group of people here. Should you be hanging out with them? And he doesn't say, well, let me tell you the theological reasons why it's okay for us all to be in a group together. He didn't say, hey, because we all are wearing the same cloak and tunic and sandals, that probably is the reason that we're all here together. I love the fact that he said, they're like, hey, why do you think it's okay for this grouping of people to be together? He said, let me tell you about sheep, which everybody in that crowd knew about sheep. The context was a very agrarian society, right? So everybody either had sheep, they either knew somebody that farmed sheep, or they were just around them because sheep was a big part of their context and their community. So he said, hey, let me find something that everybody in this crowd, because this is such a diverse crowd, let me find something that everybody in here, let me find something to talk about that can make everybody start going, oh yeah, sheep. I know sheep. I know what you're about to say. That I understand sheep. And so he used the parable to speak across that large of a common ground. So we think the common ground is human emotion, which, before you quickly click off of this talk or burn me at the stake for talking about emotion in church, let me tell you where we're coming from on this. Um, I think the word emotion, right, has a pretty negative connotation when it comes to church because, at least in our context, for years and years and years, it's been easy to see how people can manipulate human emotion to kind of get what they want. I think the church has been guilty of that time and time again. But we do believe, and I do believe that emotion is a gift from God. It is the most powerful unifier of the human experience. We all, no matter who you are, where you come from, we all have emotions, positive emotions, negative emotions. We all experience emotion, right? So we decided, hey, let's speak to those emotions, but not use them. Let's everybody has them, so let's speak to those emotions. So by creating a common emotion for everyone, we believe that first timers in our environment feel comfortable and safe. That's a huge win for us. And speaking of that, we hope that every time we are in the middle of a broadcast, every time we open our doors, whatever we do, we hope and pray and do everything that we can under our own power to make sure that there are first timers traveling along with us. Like that, we are an evangelical group. We want people who are far from God and don't believe in God to come to know him, right? I think we all probably have that in common. So we are always hoping that and assuming that there are first timers paying attention to what we're doing. We have this phrase, assume that they're in the room, right? That's part of one of the things that we do when we're thinking about our services. Assume that people who don't think like us and believe like us are in the room traveling and on a journey with us. That's one of the things that helps inform us of why what we choose to do on a Sunday morning. But by creating a common emotion for everyone, the first timer in our environment hopefully feels comfortable and safe, because naturally, just as human nature, we are drawn to people and environments that make us feel good, and we resist people in environments that make us feel uncomfortable, right? That, again, laws of human nature. To reach such a broad spectrum of people, we ask three questions. How, when we're planning our services, how will this specific thing, how will it make people feel? How is this going to make people feel when we do this, when we say this, when we try this, when we don't do this, when we don't say that? How is this going to make people feel? The next question is, what do we want people to feel? What is it that what is the motion? Because we're talking about emotions. It is the largest common denominator between people. It is the unifier of the human experience, is feeling. So what do we want people to feel if we have a say in it? And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But if we have a say in it, what do we want people to feel in our experiences? And then the last question, at what point is it appropriate to risk people feeling uncomfortable? Because we know this and you know this, that the gospel can be incredibly offensive. And we're not afraid of the gospel being offensive to people. That's the gospel doing what it is supposed to do. It is supposed to convict, it is supposed to challenge, and that's what we want. We want the gospel to do that. However, we don't want us to do that. So, can we be intentional about saying, hey, at what point is it appropriate for the gospel to come in and make people feel uncomfortable? Because most of the time, when you're challenging people, they will. So, we created a template for us based on this kind of rubric, based on this thinking of uncovering, like, hey, this is kind of what feels like is the ingredients for the why behind the what that we do. All these things that we just talked about. We created a template for us based on our convictions and the mission. And just to remind you that every church, your church, every church around you, has a template for Sunday morning and how they create the services and the experiences that people are showing up to. Whether you have written it down or whether you have talked about it or whether you've never even paid attention to it, there is a template that's part of your culture that is guiding your Sunday morning services. And we just decided, hey, we just want to write it down so that we know and be intentional about it. And so we call ours the rules of engagement. And it feels a bit militaristic. I think we didn't have a better title at the time, and it just kind of stuck. So, but here we are with it. These are what we consider our rules of engagement. This is our template for this is how we want to create. This is the how and the what of how we create our Sunday morning experiences. And this is what it looks like. It's a big funnel. Okay, think about it, we're moving people left to right um, in this funnel because at on the front side you have the pre-service experience in this engage section. We'll talk more about that, but it is a very wide end. That is the widest end of the funnel because we want to throw that net wide, right? Skeptic to saint. We're trying to be as wide as possible. So like, okay, first movement of this journey we're taking people on is we need to make sure that we are engaging them. Don't expect something out of them from the beginning. How can we just engage? How can we extend our hand to them? And so we've broken it down to kind of in three segments here. The first part is the pre-service experience. That starts with your digital presence. That starts with social media. That starts with Facebook or YouTube. That starts with your website. That starts with your app for your church if you have one of those. Anything that people can get their hands on and connect with your church before stepping foot into your church or watching a service online. That is your pre-service experience, including if and when people start coming back to your physical locations, from the time they get out of their car or they get off their bicycle and they walk through your parking lot, up your sidewalk, into your building. That is all the pre-service experience. How are we engaging them? How are we reaching our hand out to them to let them know, hey, we're glad you're here. We see you, and we're not requiring anything from you, but we just are welcoming you to this experience that we created. A lot of times at the top of our service, we'll do some kind of opener. Sometimes that is a familiar song that you might hear on the radio that has to do with the theme of our service. Where we're going in this journey, we're talking about XYZ. We're talking about fruits of the Spirit, but let's just talk about, hey, love is a fruit of the Spirit. Let's do a song that everybody might know, Beatles Love. Let's do that song. Hey, that's a theme that we're kind of starting, but again, we're not requiring anything from anybody up front. It's just, hey, let's do a song that gets everybody in the room. Hey, can we get something that gets everybody in the room nodding their head together? Not theology, not mode, not denomination, human emotion, common positive emotion in the engage section. And then when we welcome people, everybody probably does a version of this, right? So for us, we put the welcome in the engage. That's when we stand up and physically speak to them. We want to talk to them. We want to welcome them into our building, give them some handles on what we're doing. We try to use language that is very not churchy. Hey, can we speak common language that, again, makes everybody feel, oh, I don't go to church. I've never been to church, but I always thought they spoke some kind of weird language. I don't know if it's Latin or what it is, but no, let's talk like you would talk in the marketplace on Monday. So we try to pay attention to those things. The next movement would be involve. Hey, we've engaged them. Hey, let's reach out. Let's make sure we invite them into our experience that we're created for them. Now that they're here, we are going to ask them to take a step further and, hey, would you get involved with what we're doing? And for us, involve usually involves singing. That's worship, right? So we only have two things in there, but we're going to ask you to participate. Would you join us? And again, this emotion theme is following along because when we do worship, I like to say that a lot of times from the stage, I'll say one of the greatest things that we do, and sometimes it can be odd, singing together in a group of people that you don't know, right? But to break it down and say, hey, we sing because we think it's one of the best ways to marry emotion, which music is very emotional. It's one of the best ways to marry emotion with truth. So let's sing some things. We're going to say some things that are very true and anchors in storms. And but we're gonna pair it together with music, which makes it very emotional, and it can speak to that emotion part of us, which that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to appeal to emotion in this as we take people on this journey. So there's worship, and then for us, baptism is a huge piece of our service. That is something that we celebrate like crazy. We do a big video. Everybody that does a baptism in our church, to be honest with you, sometimes if you're an introvert like I am, doing something baptisms this way sometimes can be challenging because it is a big celebration. And we have everybody film their story. We say, hey, would you come in, and we want to hear your God story. Won't you tell us? And so we create a video for them, show the video, and then in the service we baptize right there. And I can't remember the last time. Well, I say that now, we haven't been in services for quite a while, but in a normal circumstance, I can't remember the last time that we had a baptism where there was not some kind of foghorn that went off in the room, or confetti cannons, or people standing up and like having some terrible racket noisemakers. It is like, hey, we're going to make this a spectacle, because this is a big deal. This is a big deal. We want people to know that when people have not only believed, but they're moving from believing to following and willing to take that step, that's a huge deal for us in our faith tribe, right? So we celebrate that. And even though people are not actively participating in the baptism, we think because of the nature of it, that's engaging them and bringing them in. And then the last kind of piece of this funnel for us is the challenge. In everything we do, we try to say, hey, we are marching towards a goal. Everything that we do, from the time people get out of their cars until they get back in their cars, is moving them towards a point. And we try to be as strategic as we can about that. The first thing that we would normally do in that challenge section is if we do some kind of title package to set the message up. But really, anything we do here right before the message, we spend time saying, hey, what can we do to ask a question, not answer it? What can we do to ask a question that the message is then going to come and answer? So it's really kind of setting the stage for the challenge, for this kind of the part where the gospel can rub up really against people and be offensive. So what question can we ask? So sometimes the title package will be some kind of story that someone will tell, and you kind of leave it open-ended and don't resolve it. Or it's a song that's kind of a haunting song that really sets up like, hey, if the chorus is there anybody out there? A song like that, that's like, well, that doesn't, I don't know that resolved anything for us. Exactly. We want anything right before the message to be asking the question. And then we want the message to come up, and we want the gospel to come up and answer that question for people. So that's where we challenge people in the message. And then for us, the closing at the end, right? This is not rocket science for us. It is usually a song or two that we think about is the exclamation point. Hey, what can we do to re-emphasize what they just heard? Whatever the bottom line of the message was. Again, for us, we're always moving and narrowing that funnel. And for us, the tip of the spear here is the challenge. We want people walking out of our services, signing off of their digital experience, thinking about one point. What is the takeaway that they're taking away? What is it that they're going to have to walk away and wrestle with? So anything we do at the end, we don't want to take away from that. We don't want it to be in addition to, but we want it to emphasize and support the bottom line of the message. And the content of each of these segments, we think, should be in keeping with the emotion we want to create and the direction we're taking the audience. Again, this is part of our planning. We always say, hey, where do we want to start and where do we want to end, and let everything else be a building block to get us there. It is either taking away from or adding to the direction we want people to go on a Sunday. We always think too, I just wanted to leave this with you here, but this is the funny part about rules, as you know, and if you're a parent, you get this. Great parents create awesome rules for their children, right? It keeps them safe, helps them to know what to do, helps them to know what the boundaries are. But excellent parents also know when to break those rules. And so for us, we have rules to the exceptions to the rules. So we think it's okay to depart from this model, this funnel, when it's on purpose. When are you being? Is it intentional departure? It's not okay. We have determined it's not okay for us to drift from this model by accident. Like, hey, we're bored. Let's do something crazy in our service. We don't think that's a great, for us, that is not a win. Hey, we just want to change things up a bit. We would say, hey, we've spent a lot of time really being intentional about putting this model together based on what we're trying to accomplish, who we are as a church, and the mission that we're on. So we don't want to just change things up for the sake of changing things up. When we move outside of this model, this template that we've created, the rules of engagement, we think there needs to be a really good reason. And as a leader, we need to make sure we are explaining why. This is why we would do something different on this Sunday. Or for a great example is, normally at the top of a service, when we're at the wide end of the funnel, we, like, again, I say we try to use common positive emotion. We don't want to just appeal to emotion, because like I said, you could do some really deep, heavy Billie Eilish song at the beginning of your service and have, in the first 2 minutes, have everybody doubting their existence and like, well, I don't know why I don't know what I'm feeling, but it's not great. So that is common emotion, but we want to try to make sure we're leveraging common positive emotion for us. But an exception to that might be if there's a national tragedy, if there's something going on in your community that is top of mind for everyone. Hey, I think right off the top of our service that everybody is walking in thinking about this right now, so we need to address it. That is a great example of we are deviating from our normal, and here's why. And as a leader, when you talk about it, you explain why, and then you need to make sure the entire team understands why. Make sure it's not just a rogue move of the leader to say, we're changing this and just follow me, just get in line, let's go. It's like, no, as a team, let's make sure we understand why we're doing what we're doing and why we are deviating from what we would normally do. And then I always say this last piece of this puzzle, the creativity quandary. I am a creative person, and this whole concept really was crafted after I joined staff 15 years ago. Part of it came about because most of our Sundays, we would spend, as the creative people in our church, we would spend trying to figure out what the bullseye was. And the only way that we knew how to do that was to listen to our pastor, who's Andy Stanley, which I think some of you met maybe on an earlier call. Hey, did he like what we did, or did he not like what we did? And if he did like it, let's go back and see what we did, and then let's just kind of try to keep creating that. Okay, the next week we did that again. Oh, he didn't like that. Okay, so what were the differences? And like we were trying to deduce what our target was by his likes and dislikes on the Sunday. Well, he could have eaten a bad apple that morning and just had a weird reaction to something we did. So it felt very like, hey, this target is just moving. So part of this was we challenged him to say, hey, I feel like we're struggling trying to figure out what it is that, how do we know as a creative team if we've won on a Sunday? How do we know if we're doing the right thing? He's like, oh my gosh, thank you. I've been operating with this template in my mind forever without realizing it. Let me put pen to paper and see if I can write down some ideas. And so that's where the birth of this whole kind of rules of engagement came from, which I thought, oh my gosh, that's so refreshing. Thank you. Right. And everybody would like some metrics on to know if you're doing your job correctly, or if people like what you're doing, which it can be hard to measure. But as soon as we came out with it, I was like, well, thank you for the clarity. Now I feel boxed in. I'm a creative person. Now I feel like you've just created the template, and I have no more creative freedom. We're all just going to be robots, and we're just going to hit the go on the factory and just spit out services every week. And so I had to wrestle with that for a long time. This is something that we kind of talk about, especially with all of our creative folks. Creativity always has constraints. We talk about this as a painter, right? Painters always have to have a medium to paint on. And I don't care if it's a 2x2 square or if it's the side of a building. At some point in your painting, there are edges where the paint just can't go anymore. So creativity always has constraints. And we think about that. Hey, when we came up with our template, it feels like it's on mission. It helps us to know what we're doing, but it did give us the edges of our canvas. We know where and how to paint now. Um, this was also a really helpful realization for us, that our goal is to not be creative in our services, which as a creative person, I was like, well, I need to go find another job. This, are you kidding me? But when I got the bigger picture that the goal is to leverage creativity for the sake of our mission and vision, it's secondary. Mission and vision is first, and creativity is a tool that we have in our toolbox, along with many other tools to that we can leverage for the sake of our mission and vision. So I have some questions for you guys to think about, and I know this might have been a little bit of a different presentation than you were expecting, because, like I said, it's less prescriptive and a little bit more. Hopefully, it's kind of poking at the fundamentals of why you guys do what you do, because there is, again, there is a template of what you're doing every Sunday. There is a culture. There's personalities. There are mission and visions that inform why you do what you do on a Sunday. But for our sake, I think these questions might be really interesting to think through. Number one, what is the win for your Sunday environment? If you've never defined it, and you can easily say it in one sentence, that might be something to really think through. Again, it doesn't need to be the same as ours, but I think it's important to have. What is the win for your Sunday environment? Number two, in what areas of your ministry environment are you experiencing the gravitational pull of the local, oh, sorry, of the local church towards insiders? Again, we talked about how it is it is the gravitational pull. It is what's going to happen, that we all kind of turn inward and make it a little bit more difficult for people who don't think like us and believe like us to kind of join our club, right? So where are you experiencing that? If you were able to step back and look and say, hey, okay, well, if I were to think about it like that, this is probably a place that we're seeing that. This is where we're making it difficult. This is where it's more difficult than it should be. This is where we're insider versus outsider. And question number three, in your ministry environment, how do you engage? How do you involve people? And how do you challenge? Again, I don't know that yours needs to look exactly like ours did, but I think those three big buckets of putting a service together really makes sense. So, and you probably are doing this to a large degree. So, what does it look like in your ministry environment? And how do you engage people? How do you involve people? And how do you challenge them? I hope, again, that this is challenging in a great way. I hope it pokes at the intention behind what you do on a Sunday, how you're creating for the digital space as well as the physical space. And I hope it sparks some great conversation over these next few minutes, and that we all walk away a little bit more encouraged and sharper when we're thinking about our Sunday environments. So thanks for hanging around this long.